Former Obama speechwriter David Litt wrote an opinion piece for the New York Times titled, "Is it time to stop snubbing your right-wing family?" And spoiler alert, he does go on to affirmatively argue that it is indeed time to stop snubbing your right-wing family. Predictably, his argument was not received well by viewers, and for good reason, in my opinion. We'll get to their comments later on. But this is something that I wanted to address myself because I have MAGA family members that I've cut off. Happily so. One explicitly, one more implicitly. And part of the problem with his argument is that, one, it's overly self-aggrandizing, and two, it's based on his experience with one family member pictured here that isn't representative of the average Trump supporter in 2025. He almost reminds me of Cenk Uygur in some ways, who also naively deduced that MAGA isn't too bad and you should try to talk to them because he had one respectful exchange with Charlie Kirk and was able to find some common ground. I mean, Anna Kasparian did the same thing where she said that she changed her mind about all Trump supporters basically because she had one nice exchange with her Trump supporting neighbor. I mean, that's all well and good, but you don't live with these fucking people. You're not forced to be around them on Thanksgiving and Christmas. And if you got to know them better, odds are you'd come to a different conclusion. Those of us with MAGA family members have. We know from experience. There's a reason why we cut these bastards off. Sure, they can be interpersonally nice, but if you talk to them long enough, their cruel and bigoted beliefs always come out. And that's if you're even able to talk to them and have like a normal conversation that human beings can have with each other. Like, you're not going to be able to have a sane conversation with my MAGA uncle, for example. He exists in an entirely different plane of reality than the rest of us. He's motivated not by economic issues, but by hate, despite being poor himself. And he starts to foam at the mouth and shit his pants the second you remind him that queer people and people of color exist. Like, this is a deeply, deeply hateful person who is physically incapable of containing his bigotry. It always comes out almost as if it's word vomit at some point in the conversation. One of my MAGA siblings, you would think that they're reasonable at first, up until a point. But then eventually you talk to them long enough about politics, and then you learn that they think that Democrats are literal demons trying to install a pro-Satan dictatorship in America or some shit like that. So I would love for all of these liberals who are encouraging us to talk to the other side to get back to me after you spend a day or two with my MAGA family members. After 10 minutes, they'll be begging for a fucking lobotomy. With that being said, there are variations of MAGA lunatics, I acknowledge that, and not all of them are necessarily too far gone per se, but the representation in this article in particular is wildly out of touch with the experience that most of us have with our Trump-supporting family members. But this author really, really, really thinks that you should embrace your MAGA family, and I say that because, he has talked about his experience with his brother-in-law again and again and again. Before he wrote about this in the New York Times, he wrote about this in Time, he wrote about this in Barry Weiss's Free Press outlet, he wrote an entire book about it titled "It's Only Drowning, A True Story of Learning to Surf and the Pursuit of Common Ground." So this one experience with his brother-in-law very clearly changed his perception. Now, I have not read the book. I'll link to that down below if you're interested in checking it out. But based on the articles that he's written, he explains that he found common ground with his conspiratorial anti-vax Joe Rogan superfan brother-in-law when they formed a friendship through their mutual interest in surfing. Now, based on his description of his brother-in-law, he seems more like a conservative-leaning normie as opposed to the MAGA diehards he invoked in the article. But in an interview, he explained how they're also polar opposites in a plethora of other ways.
The two of us have nothing in common. Our surfing skill is one of those things that we don't have in common. But, he's covered in tattoos. I have not gotten a temporary tattoo, I think, for like 15 years now. That's the last time I felt comfortable with it. He once threw out his back training to be an ultimate fighter, and I once threw out my back lifting a bag of cat litter. So Matt and I are two very different people. And I decided I wanted to try to make it to the North Shore and surf an overhead wave, right? Which I understand, like, on the North Shore, you got like kids, literal kids doing that. But for me, that was pretty scary. And I knew I needed someone with me who could help me get there. And so I started surfing with Matt, and we formed this kind of unlikely friendship via surfing. And so the book is, it is a surf book for sure, but it also, I think, is the story of a friendship that crosses all these fault lines that, these days feel uncrossable.
Now, he kind of downplayed the political angle in that interview, but he overemphasized it in the New York Times piece that he wrote to make it fit the political narrative that he was going for. But either way, I want to hear him out because I don't think it's nice for me to shit on his argument before we actually hear what he has to say. So first, he says that he was purposefully rude to his brother-in-law before he really even got to know him. He writes, "My frostiness wasn't personal. It was strategic. Being unfriendly to people who turned down the vaccine felt like the right thing to do. How else could we motivate them to mend their ways?" He goes on to argue, "There's been a sorting into belief camps algorithmically and in real life. It dictates whom we match with on dating apps and where we live. We block those we disagree with online. We leave the group chat. We don't show up for Thanksgiving. Recent data suggests that today, 1 in 5 Americans is estranged from a family member over politics. More points of deep disagreement will surely arise over Trump's immigration crackdown and use of military in domestic affairs, over RFK Jr.'s MAGA mandates, over anti-Semitism, over a MAGA bill that takes healthcare away from the poor while cutting taxes for the rich. No one is required to spend time with people he or she doesn't care for, but those of us who feel an obligation to shun strategically need to ask, what has all this banishing accomplished? It's not just ineffective, it's counterproductive." Okay, so that's just 3 paragraphs, but I read the entire article and I can tell you that I would probably snub him if he were my family member, just because he seems like an overly pretentious, insufferable prick. And that's just the impression that I got. I don't know who he is, but that's how he came across. And I say this because like one of the first things that he mentions in the article is how he's an Obama speechwriter. If you go to his book page, it's the first thing he mentions. He also talks about how he went to an Ivy League school. We get it, you're important. And all throughout the article, you get the sense that he's one of those smug liberals who farts into wine glasses and huffs them. Like that's who I pictured as I read this article. I also thought that it was weird that he vaguely referred to anti-Semitism as an issue and didn't really like elaborate on what he meant by that. If you have a family member who is genuinely anti-Semitic or a Nazi, then of course that's shunworthy. But him not saying anti-Semitism and Islamophobia or other forms of bigotry like xenophobia or transphobia, it kind of leads me to believe that he is a liberal Zionist type who fixates on supposed left-wing anti-Semitism as a way to divert attention away from the genocide that's happening. So I wonder if he's using anti-Semitism as a synonym for anti-Israel. I don't know. I don't have much to go off of. But, you know, anti-Semitism is a serious problem. And it is getting worse. So sure, maybe that's something in his family that he experienced or something like that. But just to me, it stuck out because him being an Obama era liberal kind of makes me automatically assume the worst. But to his point, yes, if someone was anti-Semitic, no, I would not want them in my life. But if they're pro-genocide, I also wouldn't want them in my life either, assuming he's referring to that. That aside, his overall point is that we've all inserted ourselves into different echo chambers and become increasingly polarized, and this is harmful both at the individual level and for society as a whole. And he goes on to share how he got to know his brother-in-law on a more personal level through surfing, and even though they haven't changed each other's minds on politics, they still managed to form a really strong bond and friendship overall. And he even said that when he was considering a run for office, his brother-in-law said that he would vote for him since he's just a regular guy, which kind of confirms my speculation that this is more of a conservative normie that we're talking about here, who doesn't follow politics as closely as, say, a Fox News brains Trump supporter who's in his 80s, who voted for him 3 times and wears his MAGA hat everywhere he goes. Regardless, he says that him and his brother-in-law dropped their guards over time and connected on a human level, and he goes on to suggest that others should try to do the same with their conservative family members too, writing, "When I share stories about surfing with my brother-in-law, people often tell me about relationships in their own lives pushed to the brink by politics. Sometimes they're proud of ties they've severed. More often, they're hoping for a way forward. How can we pierce bubbles of misinformation? Can friendships fractured in the Trump era be repaired? My advice is always the same. Our differences are meaningful, but allowing them to mean everything is part of how we ended up here. When we cut off contacts or let algorithms sort us into warring factions, we forget that not so long ago, we used to have things to talk about that didn't involve politics. Shunning plays into the hands of demagogues, making it easier for them to divide us and even in some cases to incite violence. There are, of course, some people so committed to odiousness that it defines them. If Stephen Miller wants a surf lesson, I'll decline. But are most people like that? In an age when banishment backfires, keeping the door open to unlikely friendship isn't a betrayal of principles, it's an affirmation of them. So overall, he doesn't really go on to compellingly argue why it's damaging to society or ourselves if we disassociate with our MAGA family members. And I think that his argument is bad because it's too specific to his case and it misses so many other instances of abuse and vitriol that we have to put up with that I think makes distancing ourselves from these people warranted. First and foremost, he's assuming that the shunning is exclusively coming from leftists and liberals when it also comes from MAGA as well. For example, before my auntie became an immigrant-hating Trump supporter, she called me a degenerate for being gay. I was shunned first. And just to be clear, I didn't say, hey, auntie, I'm gay. She went out of her way to say, you are a degenerate because you're gay. Unsolicited. I didn't ask for her opinion. She gave it to me. So me choosing to permanently cut off contact with her isn't just about me wanting to create a social disincentive for her bigotry. That's part of it, of course. But it's also about my own personal peace, which I deserve. I don't feel inclined to associate with someone who expects me to minimize elements of my existence to make her feel more comfortable. She adds nothing of value to my life, so I'm not obligated to be nice to her because we happen to be related. Who gives a shit, right? But this is just my unique experience. If you're a trans woman, for example, who's rejected by your MAGA father, for instance, it's not just that you have one meaningful difference with him. That difference is everything. That person is denying your humanity, and shunning them isn't only about punishing them. It's about taking power back and maintaining your dignity as a human being, which you deserve. It's also about self-preservation. Some of these people are downright abusive, and you owe it to yourself to not be around people who abuse you, who treat you like you're subhuman. Now, I think that David Litt would argue that I'm referring to more extreme cases, and since he brought up Stephen Miller as an exception, he would probably argue that a queer person, for example, is justified in shunning their family members, which is fair. But wittingly or unwittingly, he's still playing into this societal expectation that family is the most important thing in our social hierarchies, but that's just not necessarily true. In some cases, family can be the worst to you, more so than people that you're not related to. But I understand why people believe that. Regardless of how Trumpian or bigoted one of your family members is, the fact that you know them personally and grew up with them makes it very difficult for you to be impartial about them as people. Because, them being family kind of allows us to sometimes excuse behaviors that we wouldn't otherwise excuse if we weren't related to them. I think that part of it might be cognitive dissonance. Another part is embarrassment. Nobody wants to admit that they're related to somebody who is deeply hateful at their core. That's just humiliating. So you tell yourself that they're not really that way, or that you can convince them to not be that way. And you try to remind yourself of the times that they've exhibited kindness towards you, perhaps, and try to not think about their more odious views. But at some point, they end up showing their true colors again and again and again. And as a human being, you just draw the line and you say, I don't want to deal with it anymore. And I take it that the last election kind of served as the last straw for a lot of liberals and leftists. It did for me personally. If our family members can support an insurrectionist, transphobic, racist, rapist running on mass deportation, it's not just that they're immoral. It's that they're trying to impose their immorality on the rest of society through government. If you're a father who has a daughter and you voted for Trump, you voted to take away your own child's bodily autonomy. It's not just cruel, it could kill them. You are inflicting material harm on people that you're supposed to be looking out for in theory. It's family after all, right? And if you can vote in a way that fucks over your own family, your family isn't obligated to be around you simply because you're family. It goes both ways. They didn't make an exception for family when they pulled the lever for Donald Trump. So why are we supposed to make an exception for them when we cut them off? And let's be around them because they're family when I wouldn't want to be around these people in any other circumstance. It's just a double standard, right? So I reject this implicit assumption that people shunning right-wing family members are the ones doing some sort of individual or societal harm. No, it's the Trump supporters doing the individual and societal harm, and the people doing the shunning are responding to harm being inflicted on them by people who are theoretically supposed to care about them the most. If family matters more than everything, then they should have thought about that when they voted to fuck us over, right? Their votes for Trump basically was confirmation to a lot of us that they are deeply immoral people. And just put Trump aside for a moment. One of my siblings voted for Trump in this last election, but shortly before that, I cut them off because they made deeply disgusting transphobic comments to one of our trans family members. And I let them know, we're done. If you reject my trans family member, I reject you. But this person has always gone out of their way to be cruel and make other family members feel like shit. Them voting for Trump is an extension of their immoral behavior and flawed character. So I wasn't surprised when I found out that they voted for Trump, likely for anti-trans reasons, even though they're now probably regretting it since they're on Medicaid. And that's going to go bye-bye soon. But my point is that if they're a bad enough person to vote for Trump, you almost certainly already had other reasons to cut them off before they showed their true colors by casting that vote. This isn't representative of all cases, of course, but it's true for every one of my MAGA family members with the exception of one. But, just being around them always made me miserable. They never, ever shut the fuck up about politics and drop passive aggressive comments here and there. They're just inherently antagonistic and argumentative, and cutting them off was probably long overdue, but the election really was the final straw for me and a lot of people, I take it. But with regard to David Litt in particular, the author of this article, I hate to be the woke guy to make this point, but I have to say it. If you're a straight cis white guy, odds are it's going to be easier for you to excuse the reasons why one of your family members might support Donald Trump, to excuse their racism or misogyny or transphobia, because you're not personally going to be affected by these forms of bigotry. It might make you feel icky and bad, but you're not personally going to be harmed by them. So your perspective might be different if you were in someone else's shoes. I'll just put it that way. But I'm not alone in my disagreement with David Litt, because the commenters torched the ever-loving shit out of him for this out-of-touch take. So let's read a couple of comments here. I will continue to shun people who knowingly support cruelty, corruption, and dangerous incompetence. I don't care that we have a shared love for puppies, football, and crab cakes or whatever. This is way beyond policy differences. It's about human decency. Exactly. No, when human decency was pushed overboard for power, no. The answer is no. Let's keep it simple. Republicans voted for and continue to support an administration of dangerously inept miscreants who are ruining the great society that my country once was. Did you ever meet a liberal who spoke favorably of civil war? Do not normalize evil. As a person living in a city being politically targeted by our current government, working at a university being politically targeted by our current government, working in healthcare as it is being decimated by our current government, and with a worldview that extends outside of our borders, my response to this article is a simple answer. No. I hope you enjoy surfing. No. People who voted for Trump 3 times, unless they are now publicly saying, my God, this is the biggest mistake I have ever made in my life, how can I atone for this sin, have proven that while they might be nice, they are not good people, as they are perfectly fine with fascism, with those whose skin may be a little too dark being rounded up for no reason, with a whole host of vile things MAGA supports. My life is too short to waste time trying to find small moments in common with them. And I saved the best for last because this comment really says it all. No, it's not time to stop snubbing your right-wing family. I don't normally respond to op-eds, but this one struck a nerve. The suggestion that we should now open our arms to right-wing family members as a gesture of reconciliation ignores what we've all seen with our own eyes. Cruelty is no longer a byproduct of that ideology, it's a feature. This isn't about tax policy disagreements or rural versus urban perspectives. This is about a sustained embrace of dehumanization, of cheering for policies that cage children, strip bodily autonomy, demonize the poor, and erase entire communities from public life. And now we're being asked to make room for that at the dinner table? No. Human decency should never be up for negotiation. If someone supports or defends cruelty, whether through apathy or applause, they're not simply holding a different opinion. They're making a moral choice, and we are allowed, obligated even, to make our own choice in response. That doesn't mean there's no path forward, but that path is repentance and change, not coddling and comfort. Calls for unity ring hollow when they come with no accountability. Asking people to let down their guard while the harm continues is not reconciliation, it's complicity. If your political identity tolerates hate, justifies harm, or insists others must endure injustice to preserve your comfort, don't be surprised when people choose distance. That's not snubbing, that's survival. And that comment deserves a standing ovation. Just everything that they said, they articulated it better than I ever could have. So needless to say, no, this article has not convinced me. I have no plans to reconcile with any of my MAGA family members anytime soon. If they were to renounce their bigoted views and actually change their behavior and show that this is a real change and not some sort of a fluke, I'll keep an open mind. But unless that happens, there's not a fucking chance I let these people back into my life. I don't care that they're family. I don't have to tolerate their intolerance because they're family. Who gives a shit? And I know that there's a lot of people in my audience who have similar experiences that feel the same way. And I want to encourage you all to share your stories down below, because if I had to guess, most of you have very legitimate reasons for cutting off your family members if you did cut them off. So sound off in the comments, because I take it you probably also don't agree with David Litt's argument here. And I don't see much support for it anywhere.